This is Season 4, Episode 3 of Mastering the RPG, a tabletop RPG podcast all about upping your game. Doesn't matter if you're a game master or player, you'll find advice, ideas, and some strong opinions. Our episode tonight is Villains 2, crafting engaging RPG villains, or I'm just drawn that way. Hey everyone, welcome to Mastering the RPG. Like I said, we're a tabletop RPG podcast, all about doing cool things. If you want to email us or give us some feedback, it's at gamemaster@masteringtherepg.com. Again, gamemaster@masteringtherepg.com. You can see more information about us and the things we're working on at masteringtherepg.com. So, yeah, drop by. So anyway, hey guys, I'm here with my co-hosts, Eric and Chris. I am Carl, and that is the worst introduction I've done yet. So, hey, hi guys, how you guys doing? What's been going on? I know one of our fine members here got the fun to go to Gen Con. So, how was Gen Con?
Gen Con was packed. Supposedly this has one of their largest or the largest attendance. They've had something north of 70,000.
Yeah, sold out.
Yeah, and there was a couple different people I heard, Free League and somebody else, that says the Thursday sales were more than last year's sales. So it was quite large.
Like just the one day was
Yes.
bigger than the whole of it last year.
That's correct.
Got it. Wow.
And attendance was packed. I mean, the whole place was packed. It always is, but whatever COVID dip has happened has undone itself, and it's back to normalized levels.
Yeah,
And your games all went well?
Yeah, I did the Savage Worlds, Deadlands Dark Ages, and they all were sellout games. Everybody seemed to have fun. The biggest complaint was it was only an hour and they wanted more. So, I mean, to me, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
They all got a little piece of promo art, too, and some of them were even signed by the artists. So I think they walked away pretty happy.
Oh, that's cool.
That's cool.
That's awesome. So, Eric, I know you've had something exciting just starting up now.
Yeah, my campaign's coming together. We did session 0. Carl, you were there for most of it. And
I got
a lot
tired.
of new players.
I got sleepy.
Yeah, you got tired, but a lot of new players, so that was interesting. I'm going to be teaching like a 101 on it as well. But getting very engaging, like I like a lot of input from players as far as world building, so starting to integrate things that people are creating, into the world itself and expanding upon systems that will just be done as we start to go, because unfortunately, like some of the nautical things from Savage Worlds have not been updated yet, like 50 Fathoms and Pirates of the Spanish Main or whatever. So just just how I do, Carl. I like to take all these crazy systems and work on them and add them in. So yeah,
it's a very complete, very large document, player's document.
My setting document.
Yeah, there's a lot in it.
Yeah.
So
it's almost at like 30 pages at this point. I mean, not all that's a world stuff. There's like added ancestries, some added class edges. But yeah, I do have a lot of world stuff and then stuff for people to like add their own countries or religions in, things like that. Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. I just been doing my normal game. I haven't been able to do much more because I fell down this rabbit hole of trying to connect my Savage Worlds and Dice Roller Stream Deck application to Foundry. And I literally have failed so bad that I've almost to the point I'm giving up. So I have a clue of what to do, so I might not give up, but I'm very close to giving up. So it's just for fun anyway. So it's not like why. But
it's one of those things where like you can't let it go. Like you just want to find the solution, right?
I'm an engineer, so we've got to solve problems, and this is a problem that I just like really, really want to solve. But you know what? I got other things in my life. I really need to be working on game stuff and doing prep and all that kind of good stuff. So editing videos, things like that. So anyway, so it's very cool that, Gen Con was a blast. I'm hoping that maybe we'll dig in maybe in the future a little bit more stuff that happened at Gen Con and just for fun. And then as getting ready, it's not that far away, prepping for Gamehole Con. That will be coming up very shortly. So very excited about all of that. So what is cool tonight is we actually have a double feature in the sense that we have both an email that includes a cool stuff found.
Email.
All right, so we got an email from the Free Pie or the Free P, depending on how you want to say that. And Wright says, this is kind of a cool stuff found and a question. I recently discovered that there are many home architectural services that provide free floor plans on their websites. Some of these have hundreds of variations. The one I used is called the Weber Design Group, but there are probably many others. The floor plans can be used as battle maps, as a reference image for players, or just inspiration. What I especially like about them included the features I would never think to include, like a butler's pantry. The downside is for Savage Worlds, you need to convert the parameters from feet to yards. The question now, so that's cool stuff. Definitely a lot of interesting things there. The question is, how do you guys go about finding modern maps? And then he apologized for the long email, but that wasn't a long email. That was just the right size email to get your point across. So, so Chris, what do you do to... I'm teeing this one up. What do you do to find modern maps?
Well, I have very specific requirements for maps because I never know if I'm going to sell whatever I'm doing later. So I always make all my own stuff. I use Dungeon Draft as my base, and there are lots of like commercially free assets available at cartographyassets.com or some name like that. So I always start there, and then I use Procreate to draw what I can't find. So for me, it's like I have very, very specific limitations that I try to keep to or work around. If it's something I'm positive I will never use again, I think that just searching online, there's tons of good map makers these days.
Yeah, I basically, honestly, I live in our battle maps on Reddit. There's just so much cool stuff there. There's a lot of good stuff on Drive-Thru RPG. You just got to be careful that some of them look a lot better in the previews than they actually turn out to be when you download them after you put your buck in the till. And then the final one is I was turned on to this one by Sly Flourish, the Lazy Dungeon Master. He uses Dyson Logos, or Dyson, which is DysonLogos.blog, and it has lots of very OSR-ish looking maps for D&D type games. So that's very cool if that's what the kind of the vibe you're looking for. What about you, Eric?
Yeah, I mean, I don't run a ton of stuff modern, but I do like that. And like we've talked a million times, right? Fantasy maps are going to be the easiest to find. But with modern maps, I definitely do a lot of different things. So, I mean, I certainly will pay for some maps, like my Solution Maps is a big patron of mine, although he does Cyberpunk. But, either if you find maps or you pay for them, Cyberpunk, post-apocalyptic, and sci-fi are very easy to draw from those to like use for modern maps, I think. And, if you need to, hey, players, like, it looks a little too science fiction-y maybe, but like just kind of ignore that. Like that's fine, I think it's more important that you get like the interesting stuff in the environment out. Like they can maybe ignore some of the little details that might be too futuristic. But I think those three genres, there's a lot more maps for those specifically than like our, 2024 modern maps, right? Like those genres are much more easy to find. Otherwise, map assets, you can find those, buy them, or find them. And these are things like objects, like, cars or whatever, like, that you can put on kind of blank canvases or to make it seem much more modern. And then finally, Google Maps, honestly, like do satellite images of things. That you can get pretty good resolution of like a city square or whatever, or like a park, right? And again, it's not going to be the most graphically like amazing, but it's going to function. And, it's more important that as a game master, like something that I struggle with is like, I can get so caught up in making the most perfect map with all the stuff, but then I like burn out or I don't do other stuff. So just getting something out there and having the engaging part be more about the mechanics of the map than anything, right? Or like the mechanics of the combat versus the actual graphics. So Google Maps can be a really good resource for modern maps.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, the definite takeaway is there's a ton of great resources, and that idea of finding these architectural companies that provide their floor plans
Yeah,
online
that's very
is a
cool.
great way of finding houses and businesses, layouts, and stuff like that. I swear, I think once a shipping company had a map of a shipping container ship, and kind of the layout, and then where the different containers could go. And I actually used that once for a game. So lots of really cool stuff you can find out there. So thank you so much for the email. We appreciate it. I'll Hawk again. Send us more email, everybody, at gamemaster@masteringtherepg.com. So what do you say, guys? We get to the main topic. All right, welcome to the main topic. What are we talking about? We're talking about crafting an engaging villain, making an engaging villain. And so I'm going to turn it over to our host, MC tonight. Chris, do you want to take that away and walk us through it all?
Sure, yeah. We're going to talk about what aspects are we looking for when we're trying to make a villain both engaging, interesting, and transformative, right? We want somebody who's three-dimensional, not just flat. Everything from their motivations, from how they change during your campaign, to how you're creating them mechanically, all the way to the very end when you defeat or destroy or deny or convert them back to the light side. Starting at the top here from character growth. Where are they coming from? Like what? You're designing your campaign. We are trying to create somebody interesting that it's going to be memorable for the characters as they go through your story, as they go to the different areas, different plot points, their own advancement from little newbies to heroes of the nation or whatever. What are you planning as far as the villain's arc, or make them imposing, or who are they? You don't really know at the beginning, I assume. So you're writing something. So for me, that's the backstory. That's where I'm starting, and I want to spend as much time with the villains as the characters are spending, with their own backstory. Where are they from? What has happened? What gave them the motivations they have today? Was it something that happened when they were little? Does their village burn down? What is it that helps justify the direction they've gone in life and really end up in a spot where they are important enough for the characters to care about?
I think that's a great starting point, right? I mean, everything, the player characters start with their backstory. So understanding where your bad guy is coming from is just as important, like you said. So, I mean, they're going to evolve through the campaign, and you have to have a starting point for that arc, because their motivations, they're not just cardboard cutouts that stay static the whole time. They're not just evil. They have a reason for what they're doing, and that reason can change over time, and they can grow in their actions. So, very good point.
Eric, do you have anything to...
Yeah, I mean, this is huge. And, I think we're going to talk a little bit later about sympathetic parts of their story, for sure, right? But there's a couple things here I would look to. Like, for one, that they've already had, because they're starting at a much higher level than your players. Like, 90% of the time, right? They are powerful. They are the villain. That's the reflective of the campaign. Is what they are doing is what the players are initially kind of growing and fighting against, right? So their own arc from zero to hero, like that is important to. Again, you don't need to write a novel, but having just the main points of like how do they get from starting from nothing or baby or whatever. If there's some weird creature, maybe not, but they were a baby once, right? So like starting from their origin, going to like how do they end up as the villain is extremely important, because that will kind of that will like play off of how you grow them throughout the campaign. That will kind of be reflect how they act will reflect from that growth, right? Also, I think a good way to do this is have a lot of like the hidden lore, like of the world itself, be tied in with the villain. The villains like things that players are not going to know until much later, like that could have definitely influenced the villain and how they got to where they are, right? So I think that's a really an interesting way to kind of grow their backstories, is to like really plug in hidden lore.
Yeah, I like that, and I like the fact that the lore of the world is, you know, based on the vortex of this villain, right? All this stuff happened in their wake, in their intricately tied together, right? The world lore and the villain lore. Yeah, that's a very good point. So in addition to just the backstory, I mean, we're also talking. Go ahead.
Sorry, I still had some. Yeah, I just didn't know if we were.
Oh, go ahead.
Some of the other interesting things here, I think, is that sometimes I like to have hidden agendas, like things about things the villain, like what seems like they're after is not actually what they're after, you know? So like the initial quest for the villain may not be what they're actually like doing, right? Like they think, okay, we're conquering this nation or something, that's what the villain is doing or something, but that could be just like a distraction or something, and then their true motivations are hidden. So that like weaving that into the backstory is another big thing. And then finally, I just want to say that, like, you know, the villain itself, like, they could be influenced by somebody else that's even like the true villain, or at least a powerful force that's also kind of manipulating the villain, and maybe the villain is or is not aware of that. So I sometimes think that the villain itself, while still could be the big, factor, is maybe not always the like true power that's influencing everything, right? Or the villain's being manipulated in some way. So that's always fun, to even have the villain itself not being aware of everything, like the villain itself has things that they discover later that, like, oh, I'm actually being manipulated by this person. So it's almost fun to like treat your villain like a player character and like have something hidden from them in that way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I like that, and we'll get into that later, but like with redemption arcs and stuff, that would come into play, as they are just as much a pawn as other people are. Anything more on backstories? Good there. All right.
Yeah.
In addition to the backstories, then is their actual personality development, right? I mean, are they the same at the beginning as they are at the end, or as whatever junction points your characters come across? I think that showing their actual how they react to changes in the world, changes that the characters have done, changes in environment, weather, cataclysmic events, war, all of these things should be reflected in the villain's growth. Otherwise, it seems like they're on a linear trajectory that is not. It's not a living world, and nobody's really changing.
Yeah, like the players, as they foil their plans, the villain his personality could go from more I'm working hard to get my goal to now he's maniacal. He's just absolutely has to do something about these meddling kids, and it just he becomes so much more entrenched in kind of going down the rabbit hole of crazy or whatever it could be, or just becomes more focused, and the players feel that pressure coming through as the bad guy now knows what they're up against and these folks, and so his personality, maybe he was aloof, but now he's angry, or now he's changed the way he perceives the world. So definitely that change makes them so they're not cardboard cutouts where they're just feel the same all the time.
Yeah, and I like it when it's the character's fault that they went evil, something they did. But that's just me.
Yeah, that is a good way. Just a little bit of an inverse of that. I also like when the quote unquote failures of the party are reflected, and it's not always like the party members messed up, right? Sometimes it could be they went left instead of right, and so whatever the right thing was, you show that like the villain now attained something, and so while they should certainly their personality changes when they the party members foil them, the personality should also change when the villains have accomplished goals, right? They've gained more power. They've gained new knowledge. So those things could also be reflected and will also change the villain's personality, right? Like once the villains acquired this magical artifact that the party members were like failed to get in time or were too busy or doing something else. So now the villain's like, I'm more powerful. I'm going to start making more moves in this direction or putting my influence here. So you can definitely, you show their differences in both ways, right? Kind of no matter what the party does, the villain should grow off of that. I mean, it's definitely like a mutual parasitic relationship between both the party, right, and the villain. Like they're both changing each other, kind of. So yeah.
Yeah, I like that, and the inverse of that, or sort of a sideways inverse, that is that if they're not amassing power, is they're actually being demoted in their organization or whatever, but their desperation level is increasing now, which means for more erratic things. And I think that's also another interesting offshoot of that.
And
Yeah, desperation is fun. The desperation is interesting.
And and you actually see it a lot in stories, right? Where the like the right hand man of the king gets knocked down a couple of pegs, and that just pushes them harder to do the plan, the evil plan that they had, to act upon it. So yeah, for sure.
And then like just jumping off of that, like once if the like villain is losing influence, and if it's some type of faction, then having other factions appear, right? Like, and that, I think that's setting us up for some future things we're talking about. But like having, you know, other adversaries come at both the party and the villain, and that creates an interesting dynamic. Like as the players have meshed with this villain and like their influence has decreased, like other people are rising up in their power and then maybe even doing more evil stuff or more like violent stuff, and that creates an interesting kind of dynamic between these different parties and between how the players view the villains and their changes.
I think villains are super interesting, probably why we're doing a multi-part thing on it. And then one other last thing I think in the as far as the character growth or change is, and then we sort of touched upon this, but characters who don't, or villains who don't start as adversaries and start as either an ally or maybe even a neutral party or just somebody they've met in passing, and then over time, over changes in the campaign, changes in character actions or wars or different events, that they end up an adversary. So there's actually a closeness that the characters have perhaps gotten on early on that, you know, made them feel one way, but now they're going to have to, you know, sever that and treat them like an actual enemy. And I think those can be important.
Just don't do that TV show 24-hour thing where everybody that he trusted turns out to be an adversary in the end. I mean, come on. Can't the guy catch a break? Let's go. Come on. All right.
No, they gotta keep. Yeah, that's Chris. That's a really good point, and that's an interesting story dynamic, and that's something that you can plan for as a GM. Like, you know, while we do want to give players choice, and sometimes it's an illusion of choice, you know, or like we reuse things and stuff, but you can definitely, like, if you know you want your ultimate villain to be somebody that originally didn't start that way, like it doesn't always have to be just organic. Like you can have okay, I know that if the players like will probably go here, or I will, you know, I'll make a strong case for them to go to X and do X, right? That will be the thing that sets this person off. So you can definitely plan for that. And that is a really interesting way of like the players will feel like they understand the villain more maybe because of that, right? And they have maybe some more trepidation against going against them now. And then they see their decline. I mean, I think a perfect example, I mean, not done well, but an example of this could be like Game of Thrones, like end of Game of Thrones with the, what's her name? You know, Queen of the Dragons or whatever, Mother of Dragons. Where she became the villain in the end. Yeah, Khaleesi. Mm-hmm. You know, they didn't do it well because they didn't spend enough time developing that, but that is like an example of, right, she became the villain. And they tried to do it, they just didn't spend enough time. So I guess my point here is like, put in the markers where it's not just like a jump out of nowhere. Like, have the players like realize, okay, I see here where they went bad, like why they went quote unquote bad, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's super important to see the character development. You have to know when it happened. Otherwise, you're like, why would this person do this randomly? You know, I don't. Last time I saw them, they owned a donut shop. I don't understand.
yeah, absolutely.
Anything else that we want to go over, Eric and Carl, over character growth? Otherwise, we'll move to the next.
Let's keep her going.
All right. Motivations. So believable motivations. Why are they doing the things they do, and do you buy into it, or does it sound, you know, completely out of place? I think it's super two-dimensional if the characters are just evil to be evil or to be the cardboard cutout because you need an enemy. I think it's much more both good use of time over a campaign to learn about why things are happening, and then also just much more what's the word? Empathetic, sympathetic to their causes, right? Where you can kind of understand, where they're coming from a little bit. Maybe even agree to some degree, but maybe not to the degree that they are. But they're justified in doing X thing, and taking over all the villages.
Well, you may agree with the ends, but you certainly don't agree with the means that they're taking, and they have to be stopped from. They're trying to solve world hunger by plunging an asteroid into the planet. It's just not the right way of doing it. So, and I think we touched on it. The cardboard cutout. They're evil for the sake of evil. They want to destroy the world just to destroy the world. But hey, you live on this world, right? So why do you want to destroy it? And then, the last thing I'll point out is just everybody is the hero of their own story, right? That's a classic saying. So they have a reason they're trying to do stuff that makes perfect sense to them. They may need to sacrifice villages in order to bring back a loved one that was killed, unjustly. Well, maybe the party can figure out a way to do it and then solve that problem, and the villain doesn't have to be killed, or the villain can be redeemed. I guess we'll talk a little bit about arcs later, but it's very important to have a motivation that makes sense and isn't just, bland. I think you hit that, Chris, right? Evil for evil's sake is just kind of bland.
Yeah. And some of this is too the Thanos thing, right? He had good reasons, but his method was horrible. Right? He was going to kill half the people. Yeah.
And one thing, just to jump on this specific point, what's fun to do is, and this kind of goes back to things we've already talked about. But when making their backstory, like part of their motivations, like you can change the villain's backstory based on what the players are writing. So what I mean is like drawing from the own players' backstories, like having some of the villain's motivations be the same, like things as the players. And so like say if one of the players, like their family died from war, right? Then having the villain's family also have died from war is just going to create a much more strong connection from that player to the villain, and from even the party to the villain, because you've really that is really showcasing the different roads that might be taken, or you can really showcase how the player is playing out that part of their backstory different from the villain. So to your guys' point, like you can draw from the players' backstories to give the villain some more sympathetic things, right? Because the players are going to be sympathetic because it's from their own backstory. And that kind of goes to, much like player characters, your villain does not have to be completely set in stone when they start. The villain is usually not front and center right away, right? Like, obviously, so the big things are, but I think this goes to, like, changing the villain over time. Like, some of that stuff you can learn as the game master. Just like when you're a player, you kind of learn your character. You can also kind of learn your villain. So I think that's one way. And also, I'll say another on this point, is that the whole thing about learning about the villain's sympathies, I think it's really fun to show, to have other characters, like, talk about the villain or see the villain in a different light than you would, right? Like if another character, like you find an orphan boy or something, whatever, who, was from the villain's country, and in the villain's country, like, that boy, like he was saved by the villain in some way, right? Saved from killing. So they're going to look upon the villain's actions differently, or they're going to see it in a different way because they come from a different culture, or their history with the villain is just different from yours, right? So having other characters kind of, they're like having other characters be sympathetic because of their own backstories is going to help, instead of you just being like, here's the villain's backstory, like having other characters kind of be the storytellers in that way, like saying, okay, yeah, I mean, I don't know why you're going after him. Like he really helped me out. He was great at this one part. Maybe they're being manipulated, maybe they're being misled, but that is a good way to like show those sympathetic parts of the villain is through other characters, is what I mean.
Yeah, all those mobsters took care of their community, right? So
yeah.
The community protected them, for sure. Yep.
Yeah, one thing you said that I just want to also touch on is that when you learn the villain's backstory, I really like to use that as a something that is discovered along the I don't know if it's a research trip or if it's they visited this small town he was from or whatever, but it's something that they had to kind of live through themselves through reading or through traveling or something, so that they really, really can see where they're coming from, at least. Even if they don't agree, they truly understand. They just don't want to burn all villages. They want to burn these specific villages because the people who, whatever, ram them or kill their parents or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Then we did talk about this earlier, but I think we've covered most of this, but redemption arcs and further decline. Like, they're evil and they are doing things that must be thwarted or stopped or changed. But, destruction isn't always the answer. You don't have to, meet them on the battlefield and then destroy them. There's oftentimes you can spin them around, though I'm honestly unsure how many GMs plan for that type of a thing, because then, their final battle never happens, but I'm sure that's a thing. Or they even get worse, right? Maybe they're operating within the bounds of battle right now. They're adhering to the Geneva Convention and they're doing their conquest, but it can go much worse, right? It can be vile, and it's the characters can make that choice or be involved in that choice. Does this guy get a lot worse, or does this guy get a lot better? And maybe some of this is also where that villain behind the villain comes into play. Is that you do redeem them or change their trajectory, and then that's when the Snoke or whatever from the shadows comes out, and that's really you've changed nothing because he just fights a different pawn or something.
But you still get your final battle.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that way you still get it. So that's good. You didn't waste that money on your map.
The Iliad behind the curtain. Yeah.
Yeah, and here, I think it's fun to play with as far as redemption arcs is also, if the players go out and solve a problem or one of the goals of the villain, and maybe they do it in a different way, that's kind of saying, okay, the villain's, part of their motivation is gone now, and they maybe even saw, I didn't have to be this much of a, a-hole, right, to get my goals done. The party did it, and they weren't. So I think that's a really fun way is to either have the party knowing they're doing this, maybe as a possible way to solve the villain problem, right? They're okay, well, if we get rid of X or we take care of whatever, then maybe the villain will stop then. So they can either know, or it can be something that you just inadvertently, right? They don't actually, as the game master, but they don't know. And then the villain might come then around. So I think that's another way of kind of working that redemption in, is that you've taken over and solved the problem that they were trying to solve in their bad way, right?
And that goes back to that having a really good understanding of the backstory and motivations up front, because you can't really do that kind of thing on the fly, right? The players have to learn about these motivations, and then they can decide that, oh, there's something I can do to, say I can cause a change in the events that makes that goal happen in a way that's positive. But if I don't know what the goal is of the villain and they're just evil, they're just trying to get something done, then you really lose that opportunity to have a redemption arc. So it is important to understand those motivations, at least to the point where if it is something that the players can intercede in, that opportunity is there.
Yeah, I honestly don't think I've actually thought of that route before, of the characters fix the bad guy and send him on a different course, and now they take over his agenda from their perspective, right? So they still need to stop something or prevent something, but now they're doing it in the quote unquote good way, and they're continuing whatever that purpose was, but with less deaths or whatever.
Or they do it in the murder hobo way, and they just take over where he left off.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, they could be. Yeah, you never know.
Yeah.
Right? That could be the twist.
Are we the baddies? Yeah.
Yeah. Are we the
baddie? Anything else on the motivations?
Yes. Well, I have a couple more things, but the believable motivations. Because I think, obviously, the sympathy one, that's huge. But some of the other ways that you can make, that might not be quite the sympathy route. One of the ways is that the villain themselves are from a different time or a different place. If they're very old aged, the time period that they were brought up in, their morals could be vastly different than ours, right? That's something that even in our society, right, looking back on history can often be tricky when we're talking about judging things, by the modern eye, right? So a villain from a different time period or from a vastly different culture is just going to have a different perception of events, is going to have a different set of morals based on that culture or that time period. So I think that's another fun way to play with, again, it's maybe not sympathetic to you, but in their framework, right? Because they just come from a whole different way of perceiving these things than you do, than the party does. So that's another fun way to play with that. And then finally, this goes back to things we've been talking about with, like, I think, Chris, me and Chris, with the the thing that's manipulating them, like them finding out that they've been led astray or like what they believe isn't true. That's another way of, like, okay, like, of showing that, okay, I understand their motivations because they were lied to or they were deceived in some way. So having a really, really, really big lie that's been motivating the villain is another good way of, like, keeping them three-dimensional with explaining their actions. Again, it might not be sympathetic because on the paper you're like, this is just straight evil. But if they actually believe that, this faction has been, I don't want to get actual, like, current events, but, like, if they believe X faction has been stealing orphans, right, and making, I don't know, artifacts out of their skin or something, then that could be a motive, like, that obviously, that's a good motivation for them trying to take that faction down. But then, in your minds, there was just no reason for them attacking this good faction. So that's another one that they being lied to is just another good way to show that.
Yeah. I think we talked about earlier is, most people aren't just evil. They have some motivation. Yeah. But when this falls apart and then you realize that, Asmodeus or whoever is the actual one behind it, and you go, oh, yeah, I guess he can be just pure evil, Now we've uncovered the real bad guy. Yeah. Yeah,
I think sometimes, especially with, like, fantasy games, right, or Cthulhu-esque type games, things like that, when we're dealing with, like, extremely alien, like, intelligences or synthetic intelligences or things that are, like, involve other planes or, like, quote unquote, chaotic evil, things like that. Those things can just be, again, quote unquote, straight evil, but again, they have, like, a different framework for things, right? Like, it's kind of like us to ants. Like, are we evil because we walk across an ant trail? Like, we wouldn't think so, but to the ants, if they were sentient, yeah, we would definitely be evil, right? We're just a giant race just destroying them for no reason. So those kind of things can be straight evil, and that's where it's fun to play with, like, a more relatable villain that has those sympathetic things, but then have, like, the big influence like the Cthulhu that's influencing them. That is just kind of, we could never get behind anything they're thinking because they just are all about consumption, and that's what they, So yeah.
So I feel called out here, and the reason I destroyed that ant mound was because I was afraid my daughter would step on it, but it is completely gone now. And they
fire
did,
ants?
Yeah, oh yeah, and they did attack me previous, and it was not pleasant. But it may have been an evil act from them.
Fire ants are the baddie, so go ahead, take them out.
Okay, fantastic.
Yes, but the little black ants, the little leafcutter ants or whatever, or
okay.
they were innocent. So.
Yeah, we have an interesting property here. We have horrible ants and scorpions all the time.
Wow.
Okay, yeah, it's
congratulations on that.
Yeah.
All you need now is rattlesnakes, and you've got the trifecta.
You're almost like it's like James again. Like he's from Australia, so it's just full of venomous everything trying to kill you.
All my half of my adventures come from just getting a magnifying glass and going out and looking in the yard, see what's happening. Oh, that's a good idea.
Hey, next campaign, they've shrunken down in the Arizona desert, right?
That's right. Yeah, this is the Sonoran campaign. Yeah.
Yeah.
If anything else about that, we'll move on to design.
Let's do it.
So, again, you're making your villain here, and they're more than just the story, the lore, right? There's some kind of mechanical aspect that works into the RPG or the battle or the game, and there are certain choices that you're going to make, strengths, weaknesses, special abilities, sort of theme. All these things can be tied into everything we've just talked about. I have one example that I remember from another campaign is there was a villain who part of his backstory was, I forget the exact, but something about a tree that had fallen on him or something, and he had to move this tree to save himself and his brother or something like that. And it was like a feat of strength, and I gave him that ability, Strength of the Oak, as one of his, like, mechanical abilities that, when times get tough, he has this extra boost of strength he can use. And then, the players will probably never see that. They probably won't see the strength of the oak word because it'll be on the character sheet. But just kind of knowing that that's part of his story at least helps me define him as, somebody that's three-dimensional. But probably more common is going to be like the strengths and weaknesses and the theme of the character or the villains that really tie into like we're using like the Lich King for example from Warcraft. All these icy abilities, snow themes, the cold magical abilities. I think all these really add a bunch of flavor and it kind of strengthen your story a little bit. As you see that, I can see why he would do that because of X thing that I know about him. That kind of example.
Yeah, and just you should definitely tie that into underlings too, and his like faction forces, right? They all have borrowed abilities from him or unique abilities based on that kind of theme. Is very important.
I think as you're building out those powers, the one thing that I use all the time as I'm doing is as I'm putting together villains, and I play a lot of Savage Worlds, is I don't follow the rules. I mean, there's literally the whole point of your villain is to have the villain do things villainous. And so just defining what those are and saying, here's what he can do. Like you talked about the king who's got fire and water and, ice bolts and all that kind of stuff. They don't have to be, well, it's a D&D lightning bolt, therefore we're putting that down as a power on the sheet. It has to be, it's like literally, it's a thing they can do, and you actually don't want to do that because it's too complicated to deal with and running a game anyway. And in Savage Worlds, you don't build up the villain, advance by advance at advance. You give him the edges that he needs. You give him the powers that he needs. You give him the things that make them. So that's the important thing, and it goes back to the backstory. And like you said, the strength of an oak. The strength of an oak means they need a strength in Savage Worlds of D12. They need a strength in D&D of 20. It just is. It doesn't matter if it made sense from a character design standpoint or not. It just is. And I think most people think that way. But I have found folks who say, well, how do I build this character up to be the bad guy? Well, what do you mean build it up? You don't have to. You don't spend any time going through character creation. It's just not necessary, at least in my opinion.
No, for sure. And I think one of the ways that you can really accomplish that even now, because Savage Worlds, as we all know, it's make it very easy to create monsters and villains like that's just built into the system. But other systems are much more not strict but structured. We're talking about like D&D type systems, more mechanical systems. And I think it's a really good idea for that is you can borrow abilities from other creatures, other published villains, right? And reflavor. Like, just reflavor the type of damage it does. Just reflavor this to fit the villain's theme. And then you're giving the villain really unique abilities that the players haven't seen anywhere else. So, like, unique combination of abilities, right? So I think, same thing with Savage Worlds, but all the systems you can borrow from other things and just reflavor. And, like, that just goes to what Carl was saying, is that, you're not bound by any rules or any archetypes or any like assumptions from the players. Like they should have unique things that, and like going back to what Chris was saying, like that maybe have been influenced by their backstory. That can really be a good guide for game masters to be like, because if we just think at the end results, we might just create like okay, they're like a brawler. But like Chris was saying, going back through their backstory, using events from their story that influences abilities they might have or things they might have gone after, then that can be really a good guide for game masters to then, okay, I think they should have this really cool, strength surge ability. And I don't know if I can design it. Oh, but I look at like this type of giant character has the strength surge or whatever. So I'll borrow it from there, and kind of that kind of thing is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I when I actually am designing them, I mean, literally that is how I'm doing it usually. It's like, okay, this guy's a soldier, but he's a special soldier. So I'm just going to start with the soldier, and then we're going to go from there. How is he different than a soldier? How is he better? What more does he have? So that's usually my base framework, is whoever kind of a close, blandish, generic, level thing, and then build it on top of that, because that's how his life went, right?
Yeah, and the more out there your villains are, we're kind of thinking about like, humanoid or monstrous kind of villains, but the more out there they are, the less you can take advantage, the more you have to borrow from things and reflavor it and skin it and rip it apart. Like I had a campaign where the players, and this Eric was in this, were in a simulation. They're literally their whole lives they were in a simulation, and the bad guy was the program that was running the simulation. And it's not quite that, there was more to it. But when they went up against it, what could this thing do? It could stop time. It could change time. It could do all sorts of stuff that really not necessarily in the rules. It even could do basically a wish, which is a power that you have to be a certain level to get, and it just has it. It doesn't matter, because it's way out there anyway. So the players can't have any preconceived notion what something like that can actually do for real. So, yeah.
One of the things I like to do, and this maybe goes into the final battle mechanics, but when we often fight villains at different times, is I like to build in, I don't know if you call them stages or forms, or kind of like, not Deus Ex Machina, but like kind of almost like guardrails, because we always know that things can go wildly out of, like the players can just run away with it or something. So having the kind of setup before time that that the villain getting desperate might either trigger some ability, or they have some type of item or thing they consume, or something in the environment that they can activate. Like having stages is a good thing to program into the villains to protect your battles with them, that it will always remain epic, right? Because if the players run away from it, then you can incorporate them. If they're having a hard time, you don't have to use them. So I think they might go to like fudging a little bit, but it's all about the narrative. It's all about the story. You want to have that good arc when they actually encounter the villain. So to me, I like putting that in some form. Now that can be, like I said, that can be a variety of things. It could be internally that the villain has, or it can be things that they've set up, or their minions, or the base that they're in, which is something that we should talk about too. But yeah, I just like doing that, and I think that's a good mechanical it's a good mechanical decision, I guess.
And I think
think about that kind of thing. Yeah.
And I think I like that idea more than kind of the traditional advice is adjust the hit points on the fly, or adjust the damage they're doing on the fly, just to make it harder or make it easier. I like the idea that it's like, well, I've been, I am not left-handed, and go from there, right? And
yeah, exactly.
So definitely stages and kind of growing in that as you go way through minions, and I think that's a brilliant idea. I love it.
Yeah, I super am into that. As far as, and that's just like not necessarily about villains, just about combat in general. Yeah, if it were to change or develop over time, so it's not, you don't get into that pattern of, and they used to do this like in video games, do this sometimes, like in the raid games and the big group games. It's like I do my spell routine, and that's all I do. I cast this, I do this, I do that. I cast this, I do. That's all I do because I'm the most effective when I do that. So anything that changes combat, I think, is excellent and makes it more memorable and makes them actually have to think rather than just. I do the same thing I do every time. I bolt them, and then I move behind cover.
Yeah. And just directly off of that, Chris, like a big way to design villains too, or for some of their stuff, is to, we talked about this with their stories, like react from the players. The players, how they are building their characters, your villain should have answers to that, right? Your villain should take advantage of weaknesses. Your villain should have things that overcome, or that are, like you said, like if somebody's they have a really high armor class, then just been shrugging off like the minions left and right the whole game. Have your villain have extremely strong psychic abilities. Maybe they've acquired an item that does that. Maybe it's not actually like part of their core kind of quote unquote class that you built from, or their core concept, but they've reacted from the players. So yeah, that's a good way to design their abilities based on what the players have been doing, right?
Yeah, and maybe it's not even reactive. Maybe it's the players have been aware of the villain for a long time, and the villain's been aware of the players for a long time, and they've done their research. Their spies have looked around. Some of the skirmishes that they met early on in the campaign were just the bad guy was like testing them out, seeing what they can do. Like what kind of output do they have? Well, they use fire damage. Well, I'm going to have an anti-fire suit when I eventually meet them because I don't want to get burned by fire. Which probably actually does tie into the... Oh, good.
I was just saying, finally, I think, and this might be a whole other video, but you just going off of all the theme and mechanical stuff combined, their base, their home ground, right? Usually the people are gonna be fighting on that. So you just want to integrate mechanics into the base. That's all I was saying, and that goes to everything that we were saying. And I think we could almost have our own video on this, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's really important to also integrate the environment both within the villain's abilities and maybe what the villain's doing. Like, as just a quick example, like I've had boss fights where they're regenerating from some type of energy source, and that could be something as simple as water. Maybe they regenerate from the river that is around them, or pylons around the base, right? And that's one of their abilities, and so that's kind of goes to the stages in some ways, but that also leads to more dynamic combat with that you have to interact with the environment to then get to the real villain, right? The villain's abilities themselves are within the environment.
Yeah, and that's actually what I was going to say as well. Is
Cool.
the villain's character area of influence has started the moment you pass the threshold of wherever they're in control of, right? Their base. So, and if they've been preparing or if they're knowledgeable, yeah, right. If you have a party of 7 casters, well, my base now has an anti-magic field, so good luck killing me, because I'm not going to let the most powerful sorcerers I've seen running around just walk in here all willy-nilly. That's not going to be my thing. And then also the effects of the environment tie into the action economy, right? Because usually when people make their villains, the biggest mistake I think I usually see is that they just add their hit points or whatever. They make them big and beefy, and they're so powerful, but they still go down real quick because they didn't consider the action economy. That villain still only gets 1 or 2 actions. That's it, and then the entire party gets their 1 or 2 actions together. So using that base to tie that in to give it some more, mid-initiative this happens, at the end of initiative this happens, and the environment changes, and it's one more thing for the characters to worry about, so they have to actually split focus. Well, do I want to hit the boss, or do I need to take care of this environment issue that's happened, or this squad of little goblins that just ran out at me? So yeah, all these things I think tie into incredibly interesting boss encounters. Let's see, did we cover all that then? Any further stuff on mechanical design? Nope. Okay.
Nope.
And I think the next little thing was not necessary. So integration with the campaign. So we have all these great villains now. We've talked about narrative hooks in the past on how to get them involved in the story or involved in the character's interests. But what do you do with that now, right? How do you weave it in such a manner that is interesting and the players are going to buy into, right? The believable motivations were one, the intertwined backstories were another. But like, what's been going on from the villain standpoint and from the characters seeing the villain in the background that's making them, it's really driving the campaign direction. And making this, both interesting and well thought out and challenging, and giving something that players actually want to show up for all the time.
Well, I think one of the things is the world changes as the players interact with it, and so what the villain is doing and the success or failure is based a lot on the choices. So if the players choose to go left, the villain, his motivations and his goals, he may get closer to them because the players did not engage with the story, and there's a sense of impending doom if you're not engaging with what the villain is doing and you're making decisions. And this goes back to kind of where you're saying you have to make a decision. Do I go after the environment or do I go after the villain? Am I going to save Mary Jane or do I go and try to take out the Green Goblin? I have to make a choice. Yeah. And if I choose one way, he moves more forward on his goals and the world changes. And you can see that. You can feel it. The off-camera changes are really felt to the players, and they feel that something has happened because they made a decision. And so the campaign world seems alive and dynamic and not a static where it's just waiting for the players to come and meet the bad guys' minions one at a time as they march through each adventure.
And I think we can see this in a really good way by showing, not telling, in the fights they get into with their minions. I mean, most villains are going to have some type of minions or some type of faction. And so just even going back to all the things we've been talking about with either the successes or the failures of the party, the villain has changed. And that could be mechanical changes. And then we can show that with their minions. So almost like foreshadowing the mechanical changes. Like the party's now encountered these minions and they have new abilities now. They have new gear, right? That's reflected those changes that we want with our minions. So they have, they have like new ice abilities that they didn't before, because we heard about, like going to what Carl said, we heard about the villain. Okay, we didn't make it to that temple. The villain got whatever ice artifact, and now they're stronger and their minions are stronger. And now we're fighting the minions, and they have these bolstered abilities. Like crap. So we are, before they even face off with the villain, we're kind of showing, not telling, by using the minions and like showing off these kind of quote unquote mechanical changes, right?
Yeah, I like that from the character standpoint as well. Is a lot of people come up with like, I have my character planned out from new until he's top level, and I've already made all my choices ahead of time because this is who I'm going to build. And if I can see them go off skew of that, right, because they're like, oh, things in this story are making me, I want this other ability, or I think I'm going to need this, that, now we've affected that. Oh, they are good. They are paying attention. They are actually trying to be proactive in these challenges that they will face. So I really think that that's pretty cool too. Anything that gets players invested in their characters, I think, is pretty neat. What else didn't we cover here yet?
Some of the other things here, I think. I mean, I don't know if it's quite in this section, but besides the fighting and besides some of the lore, I think the villain affecting the economy can be a really fun way, and that's just the mechanics of a different sort, right? That's like the mechanics of their faction and their influence, and messing with supply and demand, messing with like, so the party members have gone back to their city and they're like, okay, we want to buy magical items. All the magical items are gone because of what's happened with, what the players have been doing, what the villain's been doing, how they've been changing. The villain moved into X city and cut off supply lines. So now, food is sparse. So there's been a lot more bandit attacks, like showing off the kind of world reacting. I think that's what Carl was saying, but the easiest way to show that, I think, is with supply and demand of like gear and items and things that the party members would want, right? Directly affecting what party members want, at least, and definitely from a mechanical standpoint, like buying their items, buying their resources, is a really fun way to show those reflections in the campaign, right? Like we're weaving it into the story and we're showing it off to them again. So I like messing with economy, I guess is what I'm saying.
Well, that villain creating that tidal wave, and now suddenly we've got a chip shortage. Is that how that works? Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, I know I've had it where they go to buy the big health potions before the final battle, but they weren't there anymore because some army bought them all out. Like, there's nothing, and arrows are short supply, so, you got here just a little bit too late.
And then when they face off the villain, like all of their minions have health potions on them. So like that's one thing. That's a new ability they have, right? That they didn't have before. So not only did you take it away from the players, you gave that ability, quote unquote, ability to the minions, that now they can heal themselves once per combat, right?
Yeah.
So that's just a fun thing. Yeah.
Very cool.
Is there anything we didn't cover now? Then I'm running out of my notes.
I think that was a pretty good rundown for sure. Yep.
Okay. Moving on to final thoughts then.
Well, I think my final takeaway is just from all of this is, again, have the villain be motivated by things other than just being plain evil. Have them kind of flesh out who they are, where they came from, so that they can be a living, breathing entity within your world. Mechanically, throw the rules out the window, make them what they have to be complex and difficult. And, the players might just solve the problem for them, and maybe they weren't as bad as they were made out to, and they were just drawn that way. See how I took that title and I kind of weaved it in there? Look at me go.
Yeah. Your voice went very dramatically lower register there to show that off. I absolutely agree with Carl. That was a really good summary of everything. I think just as a final thought here, to help people with this, like reading, watching movies, watching shows. Like if you're a game master, like sometimes like pay attention. Like there's so much good media out there. There's so many authors that think differently, and it even helps to watch like things from different countries. I think, read or watch things from different countries. That can give you a really good different view on villains from like a different perception, right? Like here's a different, because we get so stuck in our like archetypes, I guess is what I guess archetypes is a good word for that, right? Of like certain villains, that it can be good to like look outside of that at different cultures and see how they produce, because it's going to come from a different perspective. So I think what I'm basically saying is don't be afraid to draw from books and movies and TV shows and games, ideas for these villains and ideas for their backstories. You can smash them together. You can say, I really like this part of this villain, and I really, but I like this part of this villain. So kind of combining them could then even obfuscate that you've like not stolen, but borrowed, right? So players who might even be familiar with that character will still be thrown off guard because they just weren't, they were expecting X, but because you've used kind of different villains from things that you've seen or whatever, you've just thrown a wrench in that, right? So yeah, I just think, look at media, be influenced.
For me, I mean, both of those summaries are excellent, and my real takeaway is although I know to do many of these things in theory, in practice, sometimes I forget. So my takeaway here is I'm going to try to come up with a method to remember to revisit a lot of these developmental stages over the life of a campaign. Some kind of, okay, this session happened. How did this affect these factions or people, and make sure that I can revisit, each one of these type of things. Because although these are all fantastic ideas, sometimes I think I get lost in the housekeeping or the accounting of the campaign and forget about the creativity along the way.
Yeah, I think just on that point, like, don't be afraid to change or add to your villain's backstory and to your villain's motivations or their mechanics. Like, you might be influenced by something the players do or come up with, right? Like, I think just never be afraid to change it. And, you're learn, just like I said before, just like as players learn about their characters as they play, you're going to learn about your villain and like the world and direction. So a lot of that lore you've written, the players are probably not going to know it. So don't be afraid to change it, I guess. And like, that's to Chris's point, right? Like maybe you haven't done the work yet, but you can always, there's never too late to fill that stuff in, I think.
Yep, I agree.
All right. Very cool. Very cool. Thanks for running us through it. That's a lot of great ideas from that I think we can take advantage of. So, hey, thanks everyone for tuning in, and hopefully you got something out of it. Remember to drop by masteringtherpg.com to learn about all our projects and support us and contact us and all that good stuff. You can email us at gamemaster@masteringtherpg.com if you have questions, need some advice. As I say always, Eric would love to adjudicate differences of opinion. Come on, there's got to be some out there.
I also have another idea for one that would be cool. If people want to send us horror stories, that would be also a fun thing that we could maybe read off and talk about a little bit or something. So if you have convention horror stories, that would be fun, or just like other, general game horror stories, that might be a fun little subtopic as well.
Horror stories, I love it. Great idea. Great idea. I watch the email every day, so send us some horror stories. We would love that. So if you like the show, please help us with positive reviews wherever you get your fine podcasts. And once again, I am Carl with Eric and Chris. Say goodbye, guys.
Happy gaming.
Yep. See y'all. May all your rolls be great.